And I'm going to be doing a series of short videos where I'm not going to do the dashboard today. I did a large dashboard yesterday, a very long dashboard yesterday. But today is going to be a series of smaller videos. And because of the censorship, I'm going to have to be a little coy, and I'm going to have to be a little bit, walking on eggshells here so that I can get around the strikes. Please help support my work by making sure that you subscribe to all my channels. I have 4 channels on YouTube. I have Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. I have been streaming on Rumble lately, so you can see live streams on Rumble and on this channel, also on my small YouTube channel. So I'm starting to stream on different channels, so make sure that you subscribe to all. I've also did some testing on the Brighteon stream feature, so I'll be streaming on Brighteon soon here. But today is a little bit more calm down, and not all the screens are flickering and all the telemetry, but I'm going to do a series of different videos on different topics. This video is going to be on bird flu specifically. If you want to know on how to mitigate, pay attention to some of my other videos. I cannot tell you how to mitigate on this video because it will be taken down by YouTube. That's the world we live in because we didn't fight the censorship. And that will parlay into another video about what's going on with the DoD. But on this video, I'm going to give you an update on bird flu. Make sure you subscribe to all the channels. It's really important because it's whack-a-mole. All right? That's how this works. I stay alive by you making sure that you subscribe to all the channels. 4 channels on YouTube, Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. So with that said, and you can get to those channels by all the links that are in the description of this video and all my videos. So the update with bird flu, all right? I want to start with reading the chart on the CDC. This is the highly pathogenic H5N1 that everyone, is all worried about. I've been talking about this for over, a year now. But I want to go over some data first, and I'll give you my interpretation on this, okay? I don't want to spark fear in people, but the risks are elevating, all right? I'll explain why. I'll explain at the genomic level why. All right, now I want to go over the different states that have the human cases. There's 61 human cases. Most of these cases, the far majority, not even the far majority, 99%, 98% of them are farm workers exposed to a sick animal. A cow, a bird, poultry, chicken, turkey, something like that, all right? So or wild birds. 33 of the cases are in California. Those cases are primarily through dairy cows, all right? And this will parlay in, and I'll talk about the emergency declaration by Newsom in this video, but this is part of the reason. Most of the 61 cases, most of them are happening in California. And most of it is through dairy cows. There is an unknown case of exposure of 1. So 33 are through dairy cows. 1 is unknown exposure, most likely through a wild bird, okay? Colorado, 1 through a dairy cow, and 9 through poultry. Louisiana. This is the new case. This is the case that has a genomic difference than the other cases. But I'll get into the details of that later in the video. But Louisiana is more severe case, and it looks like exposure to another wild bird type situation. All right? But it's the most severe. Most of these 61 cases were conjunctivitis. Some had a little bit of a respiratory problem, but it was relatively benign. And I'll explain why that is. But the worrisome one is Louisiana. Michigan, 2 through dairy cows. Missouri, 1 unknown source of exposure, most likely through wild birds. Oregon, 1 through poultry farm. Texas, which is also going to be a hotspot. There's additional data coming out that suggests that there's an uptick of wild bird exposure that's starting to come up through the surveillance in Texas. So Texas may be a hotspot. But at this moment in time, human infection from bird flu through animal exposure is only 1, and that's through dairy cows. Washington is 11 through poultry. Okay, so when you add that all up, it ends up being 61. All right, so that's what's going on at the different states. California is by far the worst. Okay, now I want to go over a little bit of the highly pathogenic avian influenza outbreak in 2024 dealing with surveillance. Okay, so this is when they are testing different people. Now we just went over 61 humans that tested positive for H5N1. Okay, and there are different variants. Now, the CDC and the state and local health departments, I'm reading this from the CDC website, monitor people exposed to infected birds, poultry, dairy cows, and other animals for 10 days after exposure. Between March 24th, 2024 to present, there have been at least, now, are you sitting down for this? 9,600 people monitored. At least 6,050 with exposures to dairy cows. At least 3,500 with exposures to birds and other animals, including poultry, non-dairy cow source. Okay, so they're testing these individuals, right? After the 10-day exposure, they've tested a lot. I mean, big agriculture, big pharma, big farm is a large industry in the United States. Livestock industry and the agricultural industries it employs a lot of people, right? That's why it's so important to support our farmers. So a lot of people have been tested. What has come out of that testing is just that 61 people have been confirmed to have these, to have H5N1, HPAI, okay? So that means that it's a low risk. This is the reason why I said don't get upset, don't get too worried about this, but elevated risks, and I'll explain why. Now, in addition, at least 500 people tested for novel influenza A, okay? Because this, for ones that don't know, highly pathogenic avian influenza is an influenza A type. it's specific H5N1 based on the receptors that are on the virus. There's the H receptor and the N receptor. And oh, by the way, Barrick was playing around with those receptors on beta coronaviruses. And this is why I've been saying the fourth cocktail is something that you got to worry about. And that if that is somehow circulating, it's going to be a fucking whole lot worse than COVID. Why? Because it'll trick the immune system. It's like a Trojan horse, and it's what I've been calling a stepwise function. You don't believe me? It's on Barrick CV. Oh, and by the way, NIH funded the research. At least 500 persons tested novel for influenza A out of this exposure, out of the ones that they were surveilling. At least 152 with exposures to dairy cows, and at least 340 with exposures to birds and other animals, including poultry. All right, so, so there's the surveillance is, in terms of dairy, poultry, farm workers, surveillance seems to be adequate. I don't know if it's hyper surveillance because I don't know the true size of that industry in terms of number of people working in it. Are they covering everybody? Are they not? I don't know. I suspect not, but it seems to be relatively robust. Okay? So the surveillance of the workers that are in big agriculture in terms of livestock seems to be adequate. Surveillance at the population level outside of farm workers, not so much. All right. Now, the risk is extremely low for the average person. The risk is elevated if someone is working on a farm with cows or with poultry. But there's a caveat to this, and that is, as time goes on, there's going to be circulation of the different variants of this H5N1 that's going to get into other animals, including mammals. And if that starts to, and the problem with influenza is it's a segmented genome, meaning that there are different pieces that aren't what is called linear. All right, they're not continuous. They're segmented. All right, so because it's not continuous, they can recombine when they're going through different species much easier. And mutation is more common, especially with flipping H and N receptors, the code for those receptors. That's why when they talk about influenza H5N1 or H5N2, it's the recombination of these segments. So if during the natural circulation of the pathogen through different species, it's going to automatically nature will find some sort of mutation that takes place that will be able to have a new function, a new affinity to receptors. Now, lots of these farms have pigs. And guess what? Pigs are really close immunologically to humans. That's why they take pig organs, especially in the early days of transplantation, to be able to have some sort of immune system complement between humans and this harvested, let's say, heart from a pig. Now, of course, you have to do immunosuppressants because it's not a perfect match, and your immune system will try to attack the transplanted organ, but it's a closer match. So in a strange way, maybe metaphysically, humans are very much like a pig. All right? So in so many different ways, sociologically and immunologically. But the reality of the situation is that over time, this H5N1 is going to circulate through the different animals on the farm that will lead to into a viral mutation that leads to human transmission. The first severe case, now remember, 60 of those 61 cases were mild. Some asymptomatic, some of them just a little. I remember when covering this, maybe 4 had just a minor cough, and most of them had conjunctivitis, so irritation of the eye. And one in Louisiana ends up having severe complications. Now, is that idiosyncratic? Is it just that patient because of maybe their immune system is down, maybe there's some other issue that coupled with contracting H5N1 caused a worse condition for this person? Maybe. But when you take a look at the genome, it's different. Ooh, it's different. Remember what I said? 60. Now, you gotta remember, I'm the only one that I'm not even covering H5N1 that closely. And I'm the only one that I can find that gives you this much detail. 60 of the 61 had mild infection. And the reason why is that there are 2 main types that are floating around. Now, there are variants of a variant of a variant. There's subvariants. I don't want to get into the details of subvariants. It's not important. What is important is that B3, I think it's B3, yeah, B3.13 was the variant line that most of these cases were coming off of. And where did they find B3.13, H5N1? In cows and poultry. So when you're a farm worker and you're exposed to these animals, you might get some conjunctivitis through H5N1, the variant of B3.13. But what's going on with Louisiana? Oh, Louisiana. When they do the genotype of Louisiana, it's D1.1. And guess what? That's found in wild birds and in some poultry. Now, the report for the Louisiana case says that this person was exposed to wild birds. Makes sense. But the D1.1 genotype is different than the B3.13. It's still H5N1. So the point here is that if it's been shown for a year now that B3.13 or other subvariants above it or below it are mild cases of conjunctivitis and shows no human-to-human transmission, What if D1.1 starts floating around and mutates and becomes a little bit more problematic? Now again, all of these cases, 61, show no human-to-human transmission. So for the average public, it is very low risk until it's not. Let me repeat that. H5N1 currently is extremely low risk for the average person until it's not. If you're a farm worker, it's still relatively low risk compared to the number of people that actually work on farms with cows and chickens. Only 60 people have contracted, and their surveillance is relatively robust. I mean, they've been monitoring just under 10,000 people. I don't know how big the industry is, so whatever that percentage is, I'm sure it's not 100%. Okay, so let's follow the logic here. D1.1 genotype of H5N1 starts floating around in these different animals. We hear cases where zoos are starting to see that animals are in the mammal, different mammals within zoos are contracting H5N1, and people would say, how's that happening? Well, it's the birds flying into the zoo, the wild birds that have the H5N1 that's passing it on. So you have these reservoirs in cities that humans go to called zoos. And those zoos are going to be the potential mutation. Now, it's not the only place. Obviously, it's going to happen also in agriculture, livestock. Not so much at the watersheds, with wild bird to human transmission, because the wild bird has a version that doesn't have all the mutations it needs. I'll go into detail why. All the mutations it needs for human-to-human transmission. So if you contract it from a wild bird, you may get it. The chances of you passing it on to someone is very low. It hasn't happened yet. It's extremely low for that bird to have all those mutations. But when you are working in zoos, if you are working on farms with lots of different animals, you're increasing the chances of the recombination of those segmented genomes of influenza H5N1 to have certain mutations that will have higher affinity to certain receptors. Now, to oversimplify this, there are two main receptors that you got to worry about. It's called alpha 2,3 and alpha 2,6. Alpha 2,3 is the receptor that is more tied to this avian flu. Okay? And that receptor is lower in the lung. That's the reason why it's hard for humans to transmit to another human. But if there's a mutation that allows for affinity to alpha 2,6, which is in the upper part of the airway, more prevalent, right? Because there's also 2,3 in the upper airway, but I'm talking just simplistically, mostly in the lower lung, you're going to see receptors for the alpha 2,3. And in the upper airway, you're going to see expression for alpha 2,6 in your respiratory system. So when there's a mutation on alpha 2,6, then you start having human-to-human transmission. Now, let's go back to the pig. Now, I'm sure that you know a lot of people that are kind of like a pig, eat like a pig, act like a pig, look like a pig. Humans aren't that far away from pigs, immunologically and sociologically. So, what you're going to see is over time an elevated risk of having that mutation that leads to higher affinity to alpha 2/6. And when that happens, you're fucked. Because now H5N1 is human to human transmission. Now let's go back to what happened after COVID, or during the whole COVID thing. Emergency power, right? And curtailment of freedoms, and the push of, certain types of treatments, and, and inoculations, and all this stuff, what I call the Bio-Patriot Act. You're seeing it in motion right now. Okay, now I'm going to do another video on just the DoD part of this. But guess what? The emergency bill that for funding had a lot of pork in it. And guess what? Elon, using an AI to read the document, because it was 1,500 pages long, guess what it found? And I guess this is a powerful part of AI, even though I'm a little suspicious on AI in general. It found that there was pork in it that dealt with funding of certain things that would give more emergency powers, and biodefense issues and DoD issues that are all wrapped up into what I've been calling the Bio-Patriot Act. Now, it goes a little deeper because the DoD just released a lovely document yesterday, and if you follow me on X, you have the link to that document. The DoD is expanding its efforts in biodefense and chemical warfare. All right? I've been complaining about this problem that it was starting to arise, called the Bio-Patriot Act, that's very similar to the Patriot Act of 9/11. You create a situation, and then all of a sudden emergency powers are starting to come to fruition. For example, 9/11 happened, and we had TSA get emergency powers, and Homeland Security was built out, and the CIA had more capability for surveillance of domestic operations on citizens for the sake of, terrorism, right? So there was a gigantic build out of the national security state right after 9/11. Same thing's happening. It happened during the COVID crisis. Now it kind of died down a little bit because people pushed back, but the saving grace is if RFK Jr. gets in, HHS probably will not have the same emergency power. The problem is that the national security state isn't just the CIA. It's the DoD. It's the Department, of Health and human services. So these things, the Trump administration wants to kind of curtail. The Trump administration, to me, seems that they want to curtail this. They want to weaken the national security state, reduce the regulation, protect the civil liberties of the citizens, and stop the crazy, rogue national security state. This is something I want. I hope Trump is successful at it, because if he's successful at this, he will be the best president since George Washington. But I'm fearful that the national security state will drum up something similar to 9/11 to prevent the loss of power. Because the Trump administration, now a lot of people will say, how does this relate to influenza, Paul? How does this relate, Dr. Paul, to influenza? It relates, trust me. If Trump pushes Congress and pushes the agencies to restructure, defund, reduce staff, that means that the national security state will lose power. When there was an investigation that was going on at the Pentagon, one day before 9/11, Rumsfeld could not find the missing money at the Pentagon. There's some famous interview on C-SPAN about this. It was September 10th. And on September 11th, we had an attack on New York. A stand down. An orchestrated event that gave the national security state more power. Now, what makes you think that when Trump tries to take away power from the national security state, what makes you think that when the Trump administration is trying to shrink the national security state, that the national security state won't drum up something like 9/11? No, it's not going to be the same thing. It never is. It's not going to be another building with a plane crashing into it. It's going to be something different. Now, what it is, I'm not really sure. But an event that could be radiological, it could be biological, could be chemical, could be unconventional. It could be ET through some sort of psyop. We don't know. But the thing is that there's a high probability that there's going to be an event that's like 9/11 to prevent the Trump administration from curtailing the powers of the national security state. And we need to wake the fuck up. And I've been saying this for 5 years, and no one's been listening. I said on Mike Adams maybe 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, the next big thing was going to be H5N1. Roll the tape. I said it. I said shut down the fucking labs, because that's where the root cause is. But because of all the infighting on social media and the demonization of therapeutics and the demonization of, there's two camps when it comes to therapeutics or the inoculations. You have the pro and you have the anti, right? And there's nothing wrong with logical, vigorous debate. That's what perpetuates mankind. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem is that through that infighting, we didn't get to the root cause. The root cause was a runaway national security state doing things that they shouldn't be doing in laboratories with gain-of-function research that leads to therapeutics as shields for the weapon systems that they're making. And I've been saying this for 5 years, and no one was willing to stop it. Everyone like Stu Peters or, other well-known people, they focused on inoculation injury. Now, does inoculation injury happen? Absolutely. Is there manufacturing problems with the inoculation? Absolutely. I said that in 2020. People just didn't listen. And then all of a sudden, there's proof that there's SV40 plasmids. It doesn't matter what the plasmid is. The problem is you can't filter the reagents for the inoculation. So of course you're going to have inoculation injury. It's a side note that's SV40. Doesn't matter. The point is that the filtration system doesn't work. And that was known for years. years, decades. But because of social media, there was infighting, and you didn't get to the root cause. And now the DoD has upped the ante and is requesting more power for chemical and biological weapon department. You don't believe me? Go to X, click the link, and it'll take you to the DoD website where that published document is. And I warned people 5 years ago that that fucking thing was going to happen. Now, how does it relate to H5N1? Oh, I'm glad you asked. Dr. Paul Cottrell, how does H5N1 relate to the DoD? Well, my fellow citizens, in America, there's dual research. Research to try to understand the scientific underpinnings of a certain mechanism, the basic science of something, but also how to weaponize it. And when you do gain-of-function research at these laboratories, you learn a lot about what makes a certain pathogen tick, how it works, and you publish papers, and you get famous, but you get money from DARPA, the DoD, or conduits. And we know about conduits, right? Like EcoHealth Alliance. So, what happens is that there's a worry that, well, wait a minute, if we do this, this, and this to a certain pathogen, it's going to be really problematic for humans. So we got to come up with a therapy for it. Inoculation. I'm using the word inoculation because I don't want to use the common word because it gives you a strike on YouTube, especially when you're in the breach. So, they develop these therapies, and lots of money's made, and patents are issued, and notoriety, and these scientists feel so important. And what happens is that sometimes it leaks out on accident, but there's stuff on the shelf that can be used for chemical and biological warfare. Now, you don't think that this is real. You need to go to the website at the DoD, the Department of Defense, because that's exactly what's happening. Now, they use fancy words like total force and the enterprise. And they use these code words. But if you really read the document, I'm not wrong. I'm 100% right. And us Americans allowed it to happen. And for insult to injury, they're using our tax dollars to do this. I don't know what's worse, maybe using our tax dollars to do this, or them, creating some sort of drug ring, in South America for co-op operations, just for, black op operations like the CIA does. I don't know what's worse. Maybe it's equally worse. So let's get back to H5N1. So, low risk for the average person for the current mutation on B313 and D1.1. But D1.1, there's a data point that is suggesting that it's more severe, but no human-to-human transmission. So that means it's still activating alpha 2, 3, not alpha 2, 6. But that Louisiana case is going into further genomic analysis. To my knowledge, as of this live stream, we don't know what that is. We don't know the sequence. We don't know the differences. All right. So hopefully that gets published and individuals can dive into it. But let's look at this at the 50,000 foot level. All right. Once a mutation or series of mutations that take place, either through the D313 subvariants or D1.1, I suspect it's D1.1 or something similar. If certain things happen, you're going to have a higher mutation to, or a higher affinity to alpha 2, 6. The higher part of the respiratory part of your lung, of your pulmonary system. When that happens, it's human transmission. Now, how do you think that's all going to play out? When there's an R value, R not value of 3. So for every 1 infected person, there's 3 that can get infected. How do you think that's going to play out when that does happen? You don't have to have too much of an imagination because we saw it play out in 2020. Now, because people have, and this is the unique part that I provide here, because people already have a fucked up immune system from the crisis that we were in 2020. Something new, highly pathogenic avian influenza, H5N1, that's human-to-human transmission with high affinity to alpha 2, 6. How do you think your immune system is going to react? Especially when it is suppressed. You're screwed. You're boxed in. You can't fight it. You're going to get harmed by the inoculation, and you're going to get harmed by the pathogen. And I warned people what to do. You had to shut down the bioweapon laboratories that are doing the gain-of-function research, adding capability to pathogens. And everyone was so focused on inoculation injury. Inoculation injury is a problem, but it's not the root cause. It's not the root cause. The root cause of the problem is a runaway DOD. You're just focused on a mechanism, not all the mechanisms, and not the real root cause. Okay. So the current status of H5N1 is this: low risk for farm workers. Just with the surveillance of just under 10,000, only 60 people get it. It's pretty low. And it's mild, mostly conjunctivitis. There's been a few cases where I had minor cough, minor upper respiratory infection or something like that. It's just minor. So it's not that big of a deal. Now the Louisiana case, it's more severe. Idiosyncratic? We don't know. Is it something unique about that patient? Maybe its immune system's down. Were they, did they have exposure to COVID? Any inoculation? What the inoculation history is? We don't know. But if we start hearing more and more of these cases that are tied to D1.1 genotype of H5N1, then we got a problem. because you have severity, but not transmission yet. Okay. Now, let's get into the little bit of the molecular biology of this. There are 4 proteins, main proteins. It's a complex for replication of the virus. Okay? It's a replication complex. PB2 is mostly mutated, but not the only protein within this complex that's mutated, but mostly PB2. But when the other complexes, so like some of these patients, like in the 61 of the cases, some of them may have a mutation that is a little bit more PB2. Others may have a mutation that's a little bit more to one of the other of the proteins within the replicase complex. All right, and when they analyze the cows and the poultry, they're seeing that too. They're surveilling the animals and seeing what kind of version of H5N1 they have, and there's a map, a landscape. There's a map of it of these different mutations. The last I looked at it was a few months ago. Most of this is PB2. Okay, but when the point here is to see it circulating within the cows and within the chickens, right, and other animals, that when there is enough of a mutation that takes place, and you start to fine tune just through mutation the replicase complex of the 4 proteins, replication becomes better, more robust for severity, right? So, all right, so there's this mutation that's taking place with the replicase, and it's been known for a long time that when the N protein is truncated, then now you have human-to-human transmission. Why? Because it's related to higher affinity to alpha-2,6. Oh. So over time, as this replicase complex starts to hone in, and the truncation of N protein starts to take place, then you have human-to-human transmission. Now, it's not going to be tomorrow. I don't even think it's going to be this year. But I think that there is very high risk of having these mutations to take place, and or a released gain of function one that's in the laboratory in 2025 and 2026. Now, Dr. Paul Cottrell, why are you saying that? You sound crazy. Let's go back to what the national security state doesn't want, and that is loss of funding and of power. The national security state, since World War II, because of the Cold War, and because of nuclear weapons, and because of the Manhattan Project, has been running rogue and didn't want to be under the guidance of Congress or some sort of head of the executive branch. And that over time, since the end of World War II, they've been slowly eroding that away. Now, if you don't believe me, JFK said that. Oh, by the way, JFK got blown away. we're still doing the whodunit. So when you start to poke the national security state, they do things. Now, in the laboratory, that has been published, researchers in different labs have done the gain of function research to supercharge influenza A. Now, the question is it going to be H5N1? Could it be H7N9? There's lots of different versions of this. But the thing is that in the laboratory, they have supercharged H5N1. They know what the code needs to be to make it highly pathogenic for human-to-human transmission. So you don't know what's going to happen if it's going to be a lab release, but we know the code for that. Or if it's going to be an emerged mutation because of livestock. And once this starts circulating around pigs, you got a big problem. Because the HLA comparison to humans, it's enough. It's enough to allow for that leap. Now, birds obviously is a different whole species and whole immunology. When you start moving towards mammals, right? And mammals that have similar immunological characteristics as humans, primates, pigs. You know, I'm sure that when you look at family members or friends and that you might think that they're a pig or a monkey. But the thing is that when it's circulating in these types of animals, mutations do happen. And this is the reason why serial passage was so powerful in the laboratory, because that's what nature does. Just in the laboratory, you can speed it up. I just keep on passing it through and enhancing what functions you want. In nature, it's random. And there's a fit for survival that takes place. So, to get back to the main thrust of this video, low probability right now for the average person for H5N1 highly pathogenic avian influenza. Very, very low. Now, and that is the big problem. Because there's going to be mutations that are taking place. Now you couple this with the other data point of the national security state, you're going to see something that's maybe pushed ahead to try for them to maintain power. Now, they'll demonize people. They'll say that this sounds like a conspiracy theory. But tell me, when did the national security state sat in a chair in front of Congress and told the truth and said, oh, by the way, maybe we're bloated and you should cut our budget? It doesn't happen. Okay. So, I'm concerned that in 2025 or 2026, that we have about a 50% chance of human-to-human transmission of H5N1. Now, it could be through nefarious means or through something that is more an emergent behavior with what's going out there right now. But the real issue here is why, through the omnibus, were there provisions trying to fund or why were there provisions to try to sweep underneath the rug some of the nefarious activities of the DoD? So, D 1.1 is, I think, a potential issue. And until we have additional sequence information that's published from the Louisiana patient, we don't know if it's idiosyncratic or not. Now, that leads me to another thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is what's going on in Wisconsin. We have a case in Wisconsin, H5N1. Another case where it was potentially looking like a wild bird exposure. Okay. Texas, like I said, only had one case, I think it was dairy, that contracted H5N1. But Texas is on the alert. Some of the health authorities in Texas are worried because when they're doing the biosurveillance of the wild birds, there's an uptick. So I wouldn't be surprised you start hearing cases in Texas sometime near the end of the year or into January where H5N1 is detected in the population. Now again, most likely that's going to be the D, most likely is the D, the B313. If it's B313, it's probably not that big of a deal. But if you start hearing a lot of cases of D1.1, then, and severe, there's another data point that maybe the Louisiana case is not idiosyncratic. But the point here is I wouldn't be surprised at the end of the year or in January, probably in January, you're going to start hearing a couple non-farm cases of H5N1. But no human-to-human transmission is going to be like wild bird to human transmission. But the moment that's human-to-human transmission, off to the races, and the national security state's going to start clamping down. And if you don't believe me, you didn't pay attention to the lessons learned during COVID. And I did the best that I could to warn. And I can see this playing out right now. It is perfect because it would hurt the economy. It would hurt the stock market. It would hurt the Trump administration. It would hurt the midterm elections for the Republican Party. It would hamstring the Trump administration for 4 years and probably prevent J.D. Vance from winning an election in 4 years. It's a perfect play if you don't like taking power away from the national security state. All right. So now that's the Texas's warning. Hey, we're starting to see a lot of wild birds that have this damn H5N1. So they're warning the public. Now there is a case, or cases, I think it's one case, that's suspected, that's being looked into. So we'll see. But only the Louisiana case is the most severe. Is it idiosyncratic? We don't know. California. Again, California has the most cases of H5N1 through dairy cows. No human-to-human transmission. Now, it's near the end of the year. Everyone seems to hate Trump, on the Democratic side. Newsom is doing a power grab, and he just announced emergency because of the increase in the surveillance of these wild birds. They're detecting more of them. Okay. Now, again, if you're exposed to the wild bird Could you get it? Yeah. Still low probability it's going to be severe, but it could become severe, like the Louisiana case. But the chances of a human-human transmission is going to be relatively low. Now, I think what's going to happen is that there's going to be a circulation of the virus within other livestock and other mammals through zoos and through the farms that will lead to an emergent property that will attach to the alpha 2/6 receptor. And I think that's going to happen in 2025 or 2026. Now, how severe that is, we don't know. But it could be very severe because our immune system isn't ready for this. It's not ready for this for two reasons. One, we're not exposed to this type of thing where we in society have built up antibodies to H5N1, highly pathogenic H5N1. We don't have it. So that means that when the first wave comes in, it's hell. Now, according to the research, when you supercharge these things, you can still treat with Tamiflu and some of the monoclonal antibodies that are out there. They have monoclonal antibodies created if, and that can be used, that if they see, something out there that's like the supercharged version that's in the laboratory that they could use to try to mitigate it. That's monoclonal antibody. That means that it has to burn through the society at a certain rate and a certain magnitude where antibodies are starting to come online through natural infection. That first wave is going to be rough because if you've never been exposed to something, this is the reason why Spanish flu was so bad, because the body didn't ever see. If the body has never been exposed to a certain type of pathogen and you survive it, all right, it usually is very problematic. But the next waves seem to kind of calm down, and there's a harmonic dissipation, right? It's the body goes, oh, I've seen that before, and it pumps up a bunch of antibodies out of the plasma cells. Oh, and then it clears the infection. When it's the first time, though, your body doesn't know what it is. And it takes 14 days to try to find a solution. Now, if you have an R naught value of 3, and it takes 14 days to find a solution in your body, guess what? You could be dead. And so the point here is that there are therapies that are on the shelf that are monoclonal, and there are antivirals that seem to that are still effective for what is known circulating for highly pathogenic H5N1. If the mutation happens, and it's very similar to the supercharge in the laboratory, the researchers that have done this have a high confidence level that their monoclonal antibody will be able to mitigate the problem. But not everybody's going to be able to get the monoclonal antibody. Not everybody will want the monoclonal antibody. There's going to be a supply disruption, and that first wave is going to be rough if this happens. Now, I personally think that there's going to be elevated risks in 2025 and in 2026. I don't trust the DoD. I don't trust the National Security State. They lie. They steal. They're not truthful to Congress about what they're doing. Now, what's sad is that Congress allows them to be that way. All right. So emergency powers, I want to get back to the emergency powers because I went on a tangent. So the emergency powers with California is, that that early bellwether where you have a Democrat state that is trying to exercise a power grab. Now the question is, if RFK Jr. gets into HHS, controls it, will he be able to circumvent the emergency powers that the governors are trying to do? Because now you're, talking about the powers between a federal agency versus a governor, and that may be problematic. I don't know. So you have Newsom stating an emergency, so it gives him more power under the thought that because there is an increase in cases of wild flu or of wild bird H5N1, more cases of that, and the state of California having the highest number of farm-related H5N1 through dairy cows, he feels that it's prudent to do some sort of an emergency power. Now, let's play this out. It goes to January, and all of a sudden you start hearing more cases of people catching H5N1 that's not a farm worker, not a dairy cow farmer, or a poultry farmer. And people start worrying. People start getting scared, even though there's no human-to-human transmission. So you'll have other governors that are in Democrat states doing something similar. So it seems to me that Newsom is testing the water for the other governors as panic starts to set in because the average person is an idiot. All right? And so the average person is going to hear in the news on ABC, local news or whatever, that in their community there's more people that contracted bird flu through exposure to wild animals or or whatever, and they get all fearful, even though there's no human-to-human transmission, and most likely it's just benign. But if we start hearing cases where it's not benign and it's severe, even though there's no human-to-human transmission, there's going to be more emergency powers. So there's two things at work here. One is that if you don't get the alpha 2/6 receptor affinity through mutation or release, all right, lab release, all right, if you don't have that, but you have more cases like Louisiana, governors are going to start issuing emergency powers. And that is going to be problematic because you still have low human-to-human transmission, but you just have more cases of contracting it from the wild. Now we'll see. The higher probability is that there's going to be a mutation down the road that will lead to human-to-human transmission, and that's a lot more problematic. I'm not too worried about wild bird catching H5N1. It's low. Even if you get it and it's severe. But people are so dumb that they'll hear in the news more cases of Louisiana, like the case in Louisiana where it was a severe animal to human transmission. And they're going to get all freaked out. And when they get all freaked out, they just give up their civil liberties because they want safety. They don't want civil liberties, you want safety. Meanwhile, over 250 years ago, Benjamin Franklin warned us, never give up your civil liberties for safety, because you won't have either. You won't have safety nor civil liberties when you do that. But the average citizen is an idiot. All right, so California emergency powers because of H5N1, I think is the is a test to see what happens as other states start to hear similar cases. And it will be very problematic if we start hearing more cases of the D1.1 and it's severe. Then it's like, closer and closer to this mutation that I'm very worried about for human-to-human transmission with an alpha 2/6 affinity. I've been going for 70 minutes or so. I wanted to really actually be a shorter video on this. Unfortunately, I went probably too long, but please help support my work, right? Share the links, follow me on X. I have 2 channels on X. All the links are in the description of this video and all my videos. Follow my podcasts. You can listen to my podcasts on Podomatic, Apple Podcast, or on my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com. You can watch the live streams on my website also. And obviously I have many offerings on the website. I'm not going to bring it up because it'll create a strike. All right, it's really important that I did this to try to inform the public on how I think what's happening with H5N1. All right, very low risk for the average person. It's low risk if you're a farm worker, but there's elevated risks that are starting to emerge that can lead to more severity, animal to human transmission, and elevated risks that are emerging that if enough types of mutations take place, you're going to see human to human transmission. It's not going to be tomorrow. It's probably not even going to be this year. It's going to be sometime maybe next year or the year after. And when that does happen, you don't want to go through that again. It's going to be bad. All right. So humans are not ready for the supercharged version of H5N1 or something similar like H7, H7N9 or H9N7 or whatever combination that is supercharged, right? It doesn't matter what it is. So help support my work, share the links, tell your social media to follow me, all right? I get censored. I just had unfortunately another strike on another YouTube channel because of what I was streaming yesterday. But, amazing. It was about drones too. And I'm gonna do another video right after this, doing a different topic. But please help support my work. Go to my website, take a look at the offerings that I provide, share the links, ask your social media to follow me. I'm censored. They bleed my subscribers. Help support my work. And if you want to really, contribute to this, be a paid member to my Patreon channel. The link is in the description of this video, or you can donate. And you can donate on my website, the-studio-reykjavik.com. It's the-studio-reykjavik.com. Link is in the description of this video. You can donate through Stripe, PayPal, or buy me a coffee. And that way, I have thousands of videos for free, right? And I've been trying to do a different type of format where it's more interactive. But today, I didn't want to do the dashboard and the interactiveness. I wanted to just do a deep dive on what my take of H5N1 is and how this parlays into the national security state. Thank you for the ones that do support. I appreciate the super chat. And it's really important to really pay attention to what I have to say on this, all right, on what's emerging here. Because I'm not wrong. I'm not wrong. Now, you may not like the way I say it. You may not like me. I don't fucking care. But the reality of the situation is I'm not wrong on this. You got to pay attention that if you don't shut down the root cause, we are in serious trouble. Thank you for listening, and have a nice day. And by the way, I'll be doing another video right after this.